the collective unconscious, which are not necessarily personified, such as, for instance, the archetype of transformation. That is not a person. So I think there is also the archetype of conspiracy. And like all archetypes and archetypal images, I think it's ultimately rooted in something rather valid and real. Except by the time it reaches the person who is terribly excited about the I don't know, about the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, or some balderdash of that sort, or who is forever ominously repeating the unfortunate words, which I'm sure the poor old guy has regretted since then 1,000 times. I mean, the first President Bush of the New World Order. You know, this has become the big shibboleth of the conspiracy theorists too, you know, at the present time. So, you know, by the time it reaches that level, it has become absurd. It's a reductio ad absurdum. But if, like all archetypal manifestations, when you sort of trace them back like the thread of Ariadne to their origins, there might be something of a rather more profound and perhaps more authentic nature behind it. So what I am alluding to here is almost as radical as the Matrix's conclusion, that somewhere deep in our souls, we know that, to use the vernacular, that things ain't right. That something is awry with our reality. That something is wrong here. Things are not the way they seem. That is something behind it. And that somewhere behind all of this there is a contrivance that is not really to our benefit. Okay? The idea is not new, but the main representatives of this idea in various forms have always been, well, let's say, on the fringes of our culture. They were countercultural people, elements in one way or the other, whether they were George Ivanovich Gurdjieff or whether they were others, Philip K. Dick, or somebody else. In their own ways, they were all on the periphery. They were not part of the mainstream, and because of that position, they were able to conceive of this kind of a curious conspiracy at a very deep or very powerful level of reality. You know, the Gurdjieff's idea was that the existential reality is that we are living in a situation wherein only a very small portion of our potential consciousness and energy is being used by us, but not for any other reason, but because somebody conspired to keep us, well, keep us stupid. He said to keep us sleepwalkers. Now he had his own mythos for it, which is rather absurd. And I don't really think that the old guy ever intended for it to be taken literally. He was trying to convey a certain meaning, which is pretty much what everybody does. You know, I don't really think that Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John wanted to have their message taken literally. But a heck of a lot of people have, and they still do. from Jerry Falwell to Mel Gibson, you know. He said that there are beings on the moon. Well, why not? Might as well be on the moon. And these moon beings are sort of like space vampires. They are siphoning off our consciousness for their own purposes, for their own agenda. And they have implanted, this is very matrix-like, they have implanted something into us which keeps us from developing our true consciousness. So we are being vampirized by beings, spirits, whatever you wish to call it, who are keeping us in this lowly condition. Now, that is a very matrix-like notion. But of course, Gurdjieff did not get it just out of the moon either, but he, let's say, got that motive out of certain traditions which he knew of, and which ultimately go back, or let's say, well, they go back into the depths of the human psyche, but which have been articulated with considerable force about 2,000 years ago or thereabouts, and the remnants of that, those statements have sort of been floating around in our culture ever since, but in an underground manner. Now, let's further look into the basic proposition of the matrix now in a slightly more elaborate manner. At the beginning of the matrix, there is a black-clad computer hacker known as Neo, which of course means new, who falls asleep in front of his computer. A mysterious message appears on the screen. Wake up, Neo. Have you heard that before? This phrase encapsulates really the message of the film, or the films by now. As Neo struggles with the problem of being imprisoned in a material world that is actually not a material world, but a computer simulation program that is created by an artificial intelligence, created actually in the future, but don't worry about that, as a means of enslaving humanity by perpetuating unconsciousness, ignorance, impotence of a psychological character in the form of an illusory perception of reality, which is called the matrix. In part, the film brings about its ultimate view of reality by alluding to numerous ancient religious traditions that advance the idea that the fundamental problem which humanity faces is ignorance, and the solution is awakening or a certain kind of knowing, which in Greek was called gnosis, and for which there exist cognate terms in other ancient languages such as jnana in Sanskrit and so forth. The two religious traditions on which perhaps the filmmakers have drawn consciously are Gnosticism and Buddhism. In fact, the Wachowski brothers owned up in an interview to both of these. Now, the Matrix and its sequels may qualify as a modern myth, maybe in a certain way, as I don't know, Tolkien's great myth is a modern myth. Maybe, as we spoke at another time, even Harry Potter in a much more childlike manner is also a modern myth. But we also need to remember, while these terms have a certain legitimacy, in a certain sense, there ain't no such animal as a modern myth. It's a little bit like when the Midwestern farmer in the 19th century went to some big city, to the zoo, and saw a giraffe there, and he looked at it and said, but there ain't no such animal. You know that. Well, so the idea is that a myth, Campbellian term in this sense, in the post-Jung, post-Mircea Eliade, post-Campbell, post-Heinrich Zimmer, post-Carl Carigny era,